You were never meant to exist. You were just a fallback. That's what my mother whispered when I refused to donate part of my liver to my sister. For 38 years, I believed love meant silence and sacrifice. But that day, under the cold hospital lights, something inside me snapped. I wasn't a daughter, I was a spare part. And when I finally pulled back the curtain on the life they built around me, I found more than lies. I found power. This isn't a story of family loyalty. It's a story of betrayal, revelation, and choosing your own damn name, no matter who it burns. The fluorescent hallway smelled like antiseptic and desperation. I hadn't set foot in this hospital since college, but the scent hadn't changed. It still clung to the air like ghost hands, gripping your throat when you least expected it. I clutched my coat tighter, not because of the cold, but because of the message I'd received 2 hours earlier. Come now, it's Grace. She doesn't have much time. No warmth, no greeting. Just a command. Grace, my younger sister. The family miracle, the adored prodigy. I was 38 now, but every time I heard her name, I still felt 12, small, unchosen, unwanted. I stepped into the waiting room and found them. My mother, Coraline, back rigid as ever, and my father, Merrick, perched beside her like an echo. They didn't stand when they saw me. They didn't even nod. Coraline's voice cut through the sterile quiet like a scalpel. You took your time. I came as soon as I could. Her eyes scanned me, not with worry or love, but with measurement, like I was an equation she didn't quite trust. She needs a transplant. You're her best chance. I blinked. Excuse me? She's deteriorating, Merrick added, eyes still on the beige floor. Your blood type matches. You'll do it. Just like that. No question, no consultation, no choice. I haven't even spoken to a doctor. See, there's no time for theatrics, Coraline interrupted. You were born for this. Something inside me stilled. What do you mean? She rose, slow and deliberate, stepping toward me until we were inches apart. You were born for this, to protect her, to keep her alive. That's why we had you. The words landed with surgical precision. Not metaphor, not guilt, a statement of fact. My breath left my lungs in a soundless gasp. I stood frozen as a memory slammed into me. Age 6, falling off my bike, bleeding from the knees, and Coraline yanking me upright without a hug, without a glance, muttering, "Stop crying. Grace is napping." Or age 10, when I brought home a straight A report card and was told to keep it quiet so Grace wouldn't feel pressured. Or 14, overhearing my parents whispering that I was low maintenance, like I was a pet that didn't bark. I had never been hugged without it feeling like an obligation, never heard "I love you" unless Grace was also in the room to hear it. I was the backup, the second string, the placeholder. Now I was the donor. I'm not, I started, voice cracking. You can't just expect. Coraline stepped back, folding her arms like a disappointed CEO. Don't be dramatic. This is about family, about sacrifice. You mean obedience. Her lips twitched, but not into a smile. You're here now. Do what you were brought into this world to do. The air thickened. The walls felt closer. My pulse pounded in my ears like warning drums. In the corner of the room, through a glass window, I caught a glimpse of Grace in her hospital bed, pale, frail, surrounded by machines. Even sick, she looked smug, like she knew I'd fall in line, as always. But something inside me shifted. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel fear. I felt rage. Not the hot, explosive kind, but cold and clear, like frozen glass. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that sharpens into resolve. I looked my mother straight in the eyes. I'm going to talk to a doctor first. You'll do what you're told. No, I said, voice steady. Not anymore. I turned and walked out. Coraline's stunned silence trailing behind me like a broken chain. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't love. This was something far more dangerous. The hospital lobby buzzed with the distant rhythm of machines and murmurs. but all I could hear was the drumbeat in my chest. I stood in front of the reception desk trying to steady my breath when Coraline's heels clicked furiously behind me. She stormed into view like a tempest in tailored wool, clutching a folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You selfish little girl," she spat, loud enough to turn heads. "You want applause for abandoning your own sister?" I stayed still, spine straight, eyes forward. A nurse at the front desk froze mid-sentence. 2 visitors paused with coffee cups half raised. My mother didn't notice, or didn't care. "She's dying in there," Coraline shouted, slamming the folder onto the counter. "And you're worried about what? Inconvenience? Vanity?" I turned slowly. "This isn't about inconvenience. This is my body." She snorted. "Your body exists because we needed a liver. Don't pretend this is some philosophical stand. This is biology. You're a match, and you're stalling." The folder trembled slightly in her grip. I recognized it now. My medical records. Confidential. Sealed. At least, they were supposed to be. "I already said no," I replied, my voice quieter but firm. Coraline's eyes flared. She ripped the folder open, papers spilling like shredded promises. "Then let everyone see what kind of daughter you really are." The sound was sharper than any slap. Paper rained down, flitting through the air like guilt in motion. People stared. One woman gasped audibly. The receptionist stood frozen, lips parted, unsure whether to intervene. "You think silence is dignity?" Coraline hissed. "No, silence is shame. And that's what you should feel right now." I bent down, not to gather the papers out of guilt, but to take one in particular, the original donor compatibility request. I tucked it into my coat pocket. Something solid. Something real. "I took the test," I said calmly. "Months ago." She blinked. "What?" "I tested to see if I was compatible. Before you asked. Before you even told me she was sick." The fury in her face faltered. "I'm not a match," I continued. "Not close, not marginal, not even partial." Coraline's expression twisted, a war between disbelief and damage control. "That's impossible. Your blood type..." "Doesn't matter. The genetic markers don't line up. Ask Dr. Holston." Her mouth opened, then shut. Around us, the lobby seemed to hold its breath. "You knew?" she finally said, voice quieter now, almost accusing. "I knew," I said, "and I knew you'd never believe me, so I kept the proof." For the first time in my life, I watched my mother falter. Not rage, not dismiss, but truly falter. Her hands dropped to her sides, the folder empty, her argument unravelling like yarn. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was razor thin, stretched so tight it could cut skin. And it did, mine. Because even with the truth laid bare, I saw it in her eyes. Not regret, not apology, just frustration. She hadn't lost a daughter. She'd lost control. "You still could have tried," she whispered, bitter as ash. "No," I said, stepping back. "I don't owe you my liver. I don't owe you my life. I was never yours to spend." And with that, I turned and walked out, eyes forward, tears stinging, but never falling. Behind me, the rustle of paper swept across the floor like confetti from a party I was never invited to, and for the first time in 38 years I realised I didn't need to be. The hallway felt longer than it had any right to be. With every step away from the lobby, I could feel eyes drilling into my back, some with pity, others with disgust. But none of them mattered, not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached the elevator bay. I pulled it out, thumbed through the folders until I found what I needed. Compatibility test, National Donor Registry, October 12th. I hit forward to Dr. Holstrom. Subject, reconfirming non-compatibility for records. CC, Laura Lai, escrolone, no flourish, no emotion, just facts. Because facts couldn't be twisted. They didn't scream. They didn't manipulate. They simply stood, quiet, immovable. As I slid the phone back into my coat, I heard the slow, heavy echo of footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. I could feel the weight of his presence like a storm cloud pulling gravity. Rachel. I turned slowly. My father stood about 10 feet away, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders broad and rigid like always. He didn't look angry. He didn't look wounded. He looked tired, like he'd just come from a long meeting and had one more task to check off. "I suppose you think you're brave," he said flatly. "No," I replied, "just done." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to register as deliberate. Then he said it. "You're not my daughter." No crescendo, no fury, just a single bullet fired from a silencer. It didn't knock me over. It didn't make me cry. But it landed somewhere deep, like a stone dropped in a dark well, echoing against everything I used to believe. "I figured," I said. He blinked, just once. "I figured," I repeated, because no real father would have stood silent while she tore me apart out there. No real father would have watched his child get humiliated and said nothing. Still, he didn't move, just stared. "And now that I'm not useful," I continued, "you can finally say it out loud." The fluorescent lights above us flickered slightly, casting tiny shadows across his face. He looked older than I remembered, smaller, not physically, but in presence. "I never lied to you," he said. "No," I agreed. "You just watched her lie, every year, every day, and you let it happen." The elevator dinged softly. The doors slid open. I stepped inside, eyes still locked with his. "You want me to feel abandoned," I said. "But I've been alone for years. You're just catching up." The doors closed before he could answer, if he'd planned to. Inside the elevator, my hands trembled. I clutched the railing behind me, eyes fixed on my reflection in the polished steel, pale, steady, foreign. I wasn't breaking, I wasn't unraveling, I was morphing into someone who didn't need their approval to breathe. When the elevator hit the ground floor, I exhaled for the first time in minutes. The parking garage was quiet, save for the occasional hum of engines. I pulled out my phone again and opened my notes app, tested October 12th. Results, incompatible, not a match, not even close. Sent to Holstrom, CC Ed Attorney, confirmed. I added one more line. He said I'm not his daughter, I didn't break. Then, without hesitating, I typed 3 more sentences. "You cannot donate what you don't have. You cannot love where you're not allowed to exist. And you cannot stay where you were never truly wanted." I hit save, not because I needed to remember, but because someday someone else might need to read it and know it's okay to walk away. Dr. Holstom's office sat at the end of a quiet corridor, far from the chaos of the ER. The walls were painted in calming hues of sage and cream, but no colour could soften the steel weight in my chest. When the nurse called my name, I followed her wordlessly, my heels clicking on the tile like a countdown. Dr. Holstom looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. He gestured for me to sit, then closed the door behind me. A manila folder sat open on his desk, its contents barely concealed beneath a paperweight. "Ms. Lane," he began, voice professional but cautious. "Thank you for coming back so quickly." "I figured if there was a problem, better to face it now," I said. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone braver. He folded his hands, fingers laced. "Before we continue, I need to confirm something. When was your last full genetic screening?" I frowned. "October 12th, for the donor match. The results are in your system." He nodded slowly, tapping a pen against the desk. "That's the issue. There's a discrepancy in the data. We ran standard compatibility markers, but when we ran a deeper genetic match for transplant viability, something unusual came up." My pulse quickened. What kind of unusual? He turned the monitor toward me. 2 charts glowed on the screen, mine and Grace's. I recognized the format from medical databases, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The comparison markers, usually full of colour-coded overlaps, were barren, like two strangers. "There's no genetic relation between you and Grace," Dr. Holston said gently. "In fact, there's no match to either parent on file." My breath caught. "You're saying I'm adopted?" He didn't nod. He didn't need to. The silence filled the space like thunder. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to realign the lines into something familiar. But the data was clear. The numbers didn't lie. I wasn't their daughter. I had never been. 1,000 memories surged at once. Cold glances, subtle comments, the way Coraline used to say, "We didn't have to take you in," when she was angry. I used to think that was a turn of phrase, a manipulation tactic. But it wasn't. It was a breadcrumb, a truth wrapped in cruelty. "They knew," I whispered. Dr. Holston hesitated. "There's no indication of when the adoption occurred, but based on the hospital records, it was not disclosed in any of your medical history. That's highly irregular." "Highly unethical," I corrected. He inclined his head. "Yes." I stood, hands trembling. "Can I get documentation?" "I'll have it printed and notarized for your records. You also have the right to speak to our legal department. What happened here, what was concealed, crosses several ethical boundaries." "Thank you," I said, not out of gratitude, but habit. As he gathered the papers, my gaze drifted to the window. Outside, life continued. Nurses walking briskly, patients wheeled from room to room, families hugging, crying, waiting. I didn't feel like I belonged in any of those scenes. I felt like an observer, uninvited, unmoored. They didn't have me because they loved me. They had me because they needed me. Every scraped knee ignored, every birthday forgotten, every holiday photo where I was barely in frame. It all made sense now. I wasn't the accident they tolerated. I was the contingency plan they constructed. I was never Rachel Lane, daughter of Coraline and Merrick. I was Rachel Lane, the biological insurance policy. A vessel, a placeholder, doctor. Holston handed me the folder. I clutched it like armour. Outside his office, my phone buzzed. Mom lit the screen. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked toward the east wing, needing space, air, anything that wasn't fluorescent. My mind replayed his words over and over. No genetic relation, no match to either parent. I found an empty bench and sat down, folder in my lap, and whispered to no one. They didn't lose a daughter today. They lost their plan B. And for the first time, I felt the sting of truth, not because it hurt, but because it finally fit. My apartment was quiet when I returned, but not the comforting kind. It was the stillness of aftermath, of truths detonated and left smouldering. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the centre of the living room, unsure where to begin. My body was buzzing, but my mind was steel-focused. I pulled out a battered plastic storage box from the back of my closet, the one Coraline had given me when I moved out 15 years ago. "Keep this somewhere safe," she'd said. I'd assumed it was sentimental junk, things she didn't want cluttering her own space. I had never opened it. I pried off the lid and started sifting. Old report cards, my fake birth certificate, drawings from kindergarten. I found a letter I wrote to Santa at age 7, asking for a hug from my mum. I set that one aside. Halfway through the stack, I found what I wasn't looking for, but had desperately hoped existed. A spiral-bound notebook, the cover soft from time and use. Coraline's handwriting looped across the top, private. I opened it. The first few pages were mundane. Grocery lists, quotes from books, sermon notes. Then came the shift. Page after page of medical terminology, notes on Grace's condition, doctors' names, dates. A sentence underlined 3 times. Grace will need a donor in future. Must plan accordingly. My throat tightened. Several pages later, the bomb dropped. Contacted agency. Baby girl born March. No complications. Acceptable match. Then, placement approved. No names. just a cold, clinical checklist. I kept flipping, faster now, fingers trembling. Rachel doesn't ask questions, quiet, compliant. Continue building story, adopted out of compassion. She can never know. The words burned through me like acid. I wasn't an afterthought. I was a strategy. Then I found it. A folded, scanned document. A consent form to proceed with liver donation. My name signed at the bottom. Except it wasn't my handwriting. I pulled out my own signature from an old lease agreement and laid them side by side. The difference was obvious. The curve on the R was wrong, the tail on the L too stiff. It was close, but not mine. Coraline had forged my consent. I sat back on the floor, notebook in one hand, fraudulent form in the other, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so grotesquely expected. She didn't ask, she didn't inform, she decided, as always. Only now I had proof. I grabbed my phone and opened a new folder in the cloud, scanned the pages, the form, the notebook entries, uploaded them all. Then I forwarded them to Laura, my lawyer, with a single line, "Here's everything." She forged my signature. I added a second email to Dr. Holston. Found a consent form with my name. It's fake. Please confirm what's in my medical file. By the time I hit send, the rage had settled into something calmer. Not peace, but clarity. They didn't raise me. They managed me, like an asset, like inventory. And now they had crossed a line that wasn't just emotional, it was criminal. I wasn't just a daughter betrayed. I was now a witness, a plaintiff, a threat. I stared at the stack of pages, now digitized, floating in the cloud where Coraline's reach couldn't touch them. For the first time, the silence I'd inherited, generation to generation, unspoken and expected, had a crack in it. And from that crack, something sharper was beginning to rise. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city murmured below my window, cars humming like distant thoughts. I lay on the couch, the notebook open on my chest, rereading the same sentence over and over. Baby girl, born March, acceptable match. And suddenly I remembered. It was faint, like a dream, folded into another dream, but the memory clawed its way back through the fog. I was 4, maybe 5. Coraline had taken me to the hospital, not to visit Grace, but to check my height and weight, she'd said. I remember the nurse calling me sweetheart and drawing blood while Coraline stood with her arms crossed, watching like a banker counting bills. I thought it was normal then. Now I know it was inventory. I rolled off the couch and opened my old email archive. Scrolling back through years of untouched correspondence, I found it. A scanned adoption certificate dated 6 months after Grace's first diagnosis. 6 months. They didn't rescue me from some hard life, they recruited me. I clicked back to the notes from Coraline's journal, noting the phrasing she'd used, placement approved after genetic review, not love, not fate, review. I shut the laptop, my heart pounded, but the deepest cut wasn't even Coraline, it was Grace. I picked up an old photo from the bookshelf, a birthday party, maybe 11 or 12, Grace in the centre, all eyes on her, holding a sparkler and grinning like she knew she owned the world. I stood off to the side, a paper crown crooked on my head, barely in frame. She had to have known. She'd been sick most of her childhood, dozens of tests, specialists, whispers behind closed doors. She once joked that she had the blood of a queen, and I'd laughed, not realising the cruel double meaning. I texted her once years ago when I was in college, "Do you ever wonder why Mum and Dad treat me like I'm invisible?" She never responded. I thought she was busy. Now I knew she was complicit. There were moments that made sense now. The time she told her friends I was adopted, then laughed and said she was kidding. Or when she joked to her boyfriend, "Rachel's just here for the spare parts." Everyone had laughed, including me, because I didn't understand. I thought it was a bad joke, but she was telling the truth in the safest place she knew, under the disguise of humour. I stared at the photo again. Her eyes were the same as Coraline's, sharp, possessive, always calculating the room. She didn't just benefit from the lie. She built her throne on it. She didn't shield me. She used me. And worse, she made sure I never suspected. I opened my journal and scribbled 2 lines. Grace knew, she always knew, and she never once tried to free me. Tears welled but didn't fall. There was no space for grief anymore, only truth, and truth I'd learned didn't comfort, it cleared. I closed the photo album and tossed it in the donation box. Let someone else pretend the smiles were real, because the real story wasn't about birthdays or matching pajamas, it was about survival, Grace's, and mine. Only now, for the first time, I was surviving on my own terms. The conference room buzzed with soft applause, camera shutters clicking like insects, and the clink of catered glasses. A banner stretched across the back wall, celebrating Grace, a journey of hope and healing. The irony made my teeth ache. Rows of chairs were filled with reporters, hospital staff, and carefully selected supporters. On stage, Coraline stood poised behind a podium, dressed in navy and pearls like the matriarch of a war-torn empire. Grace sat to her right, pale but glowing, soaking in the attention like a monarch receiving tribute. I stood at the back, unnoticed, uninvited. "She's a miracle," Coraline began, voice rich with performative grief. "Our Grace has battled through unimaginable trials, and with the love of her family, the support of our community, she stands here today, alive, hopeful, and victorious." Applause erupted. A few in the front row dabbed at their eyes. "She's here," Coraline continued, "because family means sacrifice, because we don't abandon our own, we protect them, at all costs." My stomach twisted, and I want to especially thank the incredible generosity that made this possible. She paused, smiled at Grace, then back at the audience. When others would have walked away, Grace's sister stayed. She showed up. She said yes. I froze. My pulse roared in my ears. She was rewriting history. There was no mention of my refusal, no hint of forged consent, no acknowledgement of the truth, that I had been dragged into this under false pretenses, manipulated, and then discarded. Coraline looked straight into the cameras. "Rachel," she said, "your bravery, your loyalty, it's why Grace has a second chance." My mouth went dry. They were painting me as the hero they created, not the woman I was, not the woman who said no. The audience clapped again, warm and loud, a sea of affirmation for a fiction. I felt like a ghost watching my own eulogy. And that's when I pulled out my phone. No script, no permission, just truth. I hit go live and stepped out from the shadows. The room didn't register me at first. Not until I walked straight up the aisle toward the stage. Security shifted uneasily. Coraline faltered mid-sentence. Grace blinked like she'd seen a ghost. I reached the podium and turned to the crowd. "I won't be long," I said into the mic, "but if you've clapped for a story today, you deserve to know what was left out." Phones lifted, murmurs rippled. "My name is Rachel Lane, and I didn't say yes, I said no." Gasps, camera flashes. Coraline stood frozen, her face a mask of polished panic. I pulled the manila folder from my coat. "This is my genetic test. It proves I'm not a match. This," I held up the forged form, "is a consent document with my name forged on it, filed without my knowledge. And this," I pointed at the copies of journal entries, "is a written plan to use me as a donor, not because I'm family, but because I was a contingency." The room fell silent. I wasn't born into this family. I was brought into it, for parts, for silence. But today, I won't be quiet. Behind me, Coraline whispered something sharp. Grace looked away. I turned to face them both. "You created a story where I played the grateful daughter. Today, I choose a different role, the truth teller." And with that, I ended the live stream. The room held its breath. as if everyone had forgotten how to inhale. Dozens of phones were still raised, frozen in mid-air. Reporters blinked behind their cameras, unsure whether to keep filming or run with the headline. Coraline stood motionless behind me, her fingers twitching against the podium like she was grasping for a script that no longer fit. I stepped aside and held up the first page, a lab-certified genetic test bearing my name, date-stamped and notarized. "This confirms I am not biologically related to Grace," I said, "nor to the people who raised me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The second document, my supposed consent form, shook slightly in my hand, not from nerves, but from the sheer adrenaline of revelation. This form was submitted to this hospital under my name, authorizing a liver donation I never agreed to. That signature, I held it closer to the cameras, is forged. Reporters stood now, pushing forward, snapping shots like gunfire. The hospital's PR team whispered furiously at the back of the room. "And this," I pulled out the last page, the one that hurt the most, "is my amended birth certificate, issued months after Grace was diagnosed. It lists Coraline and Merrick Lane as my parents, but I was never theirs. I was placed, recruited, not out of love, but out of necessity." The silence cracked like a bone. A low wail echoed from the corner of the stage. Coraline collapsed, her body hitting the polished wood with a thud. Grace lunged forward, catching her mother as staff rushed in, but even in that chaos, Grace's eyes darted to me, not with shock, not with guilt, but with fury. She knew, she always knew. I turned to face the cameras one last time. "I am not a spare part," I said, voice clear, unwavering. "I am not a vessel. I am not a shadow. I am not a lie someone else wrote down and asked me to live inside." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "I'm not their daughter. I'm not her saviour. I'm me." And then, before anyone could stop me, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and reactivated the live feed. My voice rang into thousands of timelines in real time. This is the truth they wanted buried, and I won't bury it with them. In the back of the room, Grace turned to the AV table, hissed something at the technician. The live stream screen flickered, then went black. Too late. Within seconds, my phone buzzed, notifications spilling across the screen like digital confetti. Screenshots, tags, shares, #Rachel is real, #not a family, #truth over blood. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, but inside the noise was louder. Questions, accusations, camera lights exploding like fireworks. A security guard stepped toward me, unsure whether to escort or protect. I handed him the folder. "Make sure that gets to legal." He nodded. As I walked out of the room, heels striking like gunfire against marble, I didn't look back. Coraline would be fine. She always landed on her feet. Grace would pivot. She was too polished not to. But the version of Rachel they had constructed, she wouldn't survive this, and that was the point. I pushed open the glass doors of the hospital lobby and stepped into the afternoon light. It hit my face like absolution. Behind me, voices shouted. Phones rang, news vans screeched to the curb, but I walked, not away, forward, into something finally, fully mine. The news hit like a flood. By morning, my face was everywhere, on screens, in headlines dissected across talk shows and comment sections like I was a crime scene. Daughter reveals she's not a match nor a daughter. Forgery scandal at St. Helena's. Sister or sacrifice? Some called me brave, others bitter. Some praised my strength, others questioned my timing. The world, as always, demanded sides. But I wasn't playing their game. I turned off notifications, logged out of everything, closed the curtains and sat in silence, letting the storm pass without me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was distance. And for the first time in my life, I had that on my terms. Laura called on the second day. "They want you to speak," she said. "Who?" "The bioethics conference." panel on medical consent and donor fraud. Apparently, you've become a case study." I laughed, dry and low. "So now I'm educational." "You're necessary," she replied. "You've got documentation. You've got a voice. They want you to use it." I paused, then nodded. "I'll do it." The conference room 3 days later couldn't have been more different than Coraline's staged circus. This wasn't glamour, it was governance. Professionals in suits, clipboards on laps, and every face fixed on truth, not theatre. Dr. Holston stood beside me at the panel table, his expression tight but respectful. When the moderator asked him to summarise his findings, he didn't hesitate. "Rachel Lane was never a viable candidate for organ donation," he said clearly. "Not due to medical complications, but because she is not genetically related to the patient. That fact was known, or could have been known, to the family prior to her involvement. The consent form in our system is a forgery. Our systems failed to catch it. For that, we take full responsibility." A murmur rippled through the audience, but I stayed still. The moderator turned to me. "Ms. Lane, would you like to respond?" I nodded, then stood. For most of my life, silence was how I survived. I thought it meant strength. I thought it meant love. But silence also enabled a lie, a dangerous, damaging one. I took a breath. I didn't come here for justice or revenge. I came because too many people are still told they owe their bodies, their blood, their peace to someone else's need. The room was quiet, listening. "I'm not an anomaly," I continued. "I'm just the one who spoke, and I hope to God I'm not the last." Applause rose, not thunderous but solid, grounded. The kind that meant understanding, not performance. Afterwards, several doctors approached me with questions. A nurse hugged me. A medical student asked for a copy of my testimony. Dr. Holston pulled me aside before I left. "Rachel," he said gently, "this shouldn't have happened to you." "I know," I replied, "but what you've done with it, that matters." Outside the conference hall, the sun felt sharper than it had in weeks. Not because it was warmer, but because I could finally feel it, without the weight of performance, without the shadow of obligation. The world had tried to define me, daughter, donor, destroyer. But here, in this sliver of quiet truth, I wasn't any of those. I was something new. 3 days after the conference, I received an envelope from Laura, hand-delivered, no digital trail. I knew before I opened it that something inside would hurt, but I didn't expect the relief. The letter was from the estate attorney who had worked with my parents for over 2 decades. Polite, formal, hollow. It stated that my name had been removed from all legal documents of inheritance 12 years ago. No assets, no claims, no mention in any will. The decision, it explained, was in consideration of future medical needs and long-term estate preservation for Grace Lane. Grace. Always Grace. It didn't say it, but I could read between the lines. You were never supposed to inherit. You were never supposed to stay. I wasn't family. I was leverage. And once I was no longer viable, I became a liability. Laura called an hour later. "I know this stings," she said, her voice careful, "but it could work in our favour legally. It proves intent, long-term exclusion. Strategic, not accidental." I let her talk, let the facts stack. But I wasn't really listening. My mind had already shifted gears because for the first time I didn't feel discarded. I felt released. I didn't belong to them. Not in blood, not in law, not in spirit, and now not even on paper. It should have broken me. Years ago it would have, but now it only cleared the fog. They never gave me a name. They assigned me one. So I decided to return the favour. That evening, I filled out the initial paperwork for a legal name change. I stared at the line labelled current name, Rachel Lane, and then at the blank line beneath. New legal name. And I wrote it. Rachel Hale. Hale. Old English for whole, sound, free of defect. I didn't want to erase my past. I wanted to mark my future. Every time someone said my name, I wanted it to mean survival. Not of them, in spite of them. The next morning, I submitted the documents at the county clerk's office. The woman at the front desk looked up with practiced neutrality, but something flickered in her eyes when she saw the name. "Are you—" she started, then caught herself. "Never mind." "I am," I said. She nodded once, then stamped the forms without another word. It would take weeks for the change to process, but in that moment, it was already real. I had chosen something, not accepted, not endured, chosen. I walked out of that office and into a world that didn't look different, but felt it. Every street corner was mine, every breath tasted new, every step echoed like freedom. That afternoon, I boxed up the last of the photo albums, old letters, and awards I'd once thought proved I mattered. I didn't burn them. I didn't need to. I simply taped the box shut, wrote archive on the label, and slid it under my bed. Not to forget, but to move forward. When I lay in bed that night, I didn't count regrets. I counted choices. And for the first time, they were mine. The message came through at 4:45 p.m. "Grace, can we meet? Just us, please." I stared at the screen for a full minute, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure why she was saying anything at all. After everything, after silence, after complicity, after letting them twist my life into a script I never agreed to, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe caution, said yes. We met at the hospital, in the far end of the East Wing, a waiting room that had seen too many tears and not enough truths. It was empty, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like old regrets. Grace sat on a bench, her hoodie pulled tight around her thin frame, hospital socks bunched under her heels. She didn't look up when I entered, and I didn't sit right away. I watched her for a long second. She spoke first. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I leaned against the wall. "I wasn't either." A pause. Then she looked up, and for once there was no smirk, no mask, no echo of Coraline in her eyes, just fatigue, and something else, something raw. "I knew," she said. It wasn't a confession, it was an acknowledgement. "I figured," I replied. "I knew from when I was 10. I overheard Mum talking to Dad in the kitchen. She said you were acquired, like a file, a folder, something." The word landed like gravel in my chest. "I didn't say anything," she continued. "I didn't ask questions. I just accepted it. I figured if they brought you here for me, then that's just what it was." "That's convenient," I said quietly. Grace nodded. "Yeah, it was." She rubbed her palms together, skin pale, knuckles sharp. "I didn't hate you, you know." "You didn't have to. You erased me without lifting a finger." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "I used to think," she said, "that you were just quiet, just forgettable. But you weren't. You were carrying all of us, and we never looked back to see if it was breaking you." I sat then, not next to her, but close enough to hear the honesty in her breath. "I thought you were a burden," she whispered. "But now I know you were the sacrifice." We sat in silence after that, not the kind that begged to be filled, the kind that acknowledged nothing else needed to be said. "You think I want an apology?" I finally asked. She shook her head. "No." "Good, because I don't. And I'm not giving one either." She looked over at me. "I know." We stayed like that, two strangers who once shared a home, a table, a false last name. There was no dramatic reunion, no forgiveness montage, just the ache of understanding and the clean, cold shape of finality. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I didn't think you would. No calls, no emails. If I see you in public, I won't stop." She nodded once, slowly. "I'm changing my name," I added. "You already have," she said. For the first time, I smiled. Not at her, not for her, just for me. The silence stretched between us, not heavy, not hostile, just final, like the last page of a book neither of us would reread. I looked at Grace, her shoulders hunched inward, her eyes hollow but no longer defiant. There was no more fight in her, no more smirks, just quiet acceptance that the game was over, and she hadn't won. I stood. She didn't move. "I don't hate you," I said, voice calm. "But I'm not carrying you anymore, or them, or any version of me they tried to sculpt." Grace nodded, but she didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, hands clasped tightly in her lap like she was holding on to the last thing she had, herself. "I don't need anything from you," I continued. "Not understanding, not approval, not closure." Her lips parted slightly, maybe to respond, maybe to ask for something, but I cut her off before the moment could mutate. "This isn't peace," I said. "It's exit." I took one last look around the waiting room, the plastic chairs, the dim corners, the ticking wall clock. I realized I'd spent too much of my life in spaces like this, holding my breath, waiting for someone else's verdict. Not anymore. I turned toward the door. Grace's voice came, soft, like wind through cracked glass. "Rachel." I stopped, but didn't turn. "I hope someday you find what they never gave you." I closed my eyes for half a second, then opened them and kept walking. There were no strings left, no invisible chains, no fantasy that time or truth would rebuild what never really existed. She was blood. But blood, I'd learned, doesn't bind. It stains. The hallway outside felt longer, quieter than I remembered. My footsteps echoed, sharp and certain, down polished tile. A nurse passed me, recognized me, her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, just kept walking. Maybe she'd seen the live stream. Maybe she just saw something in my face that said, "Not today." Outside, the sky had turned gold, that fleeting moment before dusk when everything glows a little softer, like the world's trying to apologize, but I didn't need its apology either. I took out my phone, opened the note I'd written weeks ago, and read the last line, "You cannot stay where you were never truly wanted." Then I added one more. "You don't have to explain why you leave, because sometimes the leaving is the explanation." Behind me, Grace remained in that waiting room, alone, not just in body, but in power. The dynamic that had held our family together, her need, my guilt, was gone. It didn't dissolve. I took it back. She would sit in that room with all the knowledge in the world and none of the control. And me, I walked into a version of myself I'd never met before. One with no burden, no leash, no script, just breath, just choice, just forward. The official papers arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked inside a stiff white envelope stamped with the county seal. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might vanish if I wasn't gentle enough. But there it was, in bold black print. Rachel Hale, legally mine. No strings, no parentheses, no caveats. I stared at the document for a long time, letting the letters settle into my bones. Hale, whole, healed, chosen. I'd never picked a single thing about myself, not my name, not my story, not my role, until now. I folded the certificate and placed it inside my keepsake box. Not the one from Coraline, but one I bought just last week. Oak, solid, unmarked. My new archive, not of pain, but of beginning. Later that day, I picked up a coffee from the corner cafe and walked to my apartment's mailbox. It had become a habit again, checking it every few days. Not for bills, not for junk, just in case something real might slip through. That's when I found the envelope. No return address. The handwriting on the front was uneven, careful, like someone tracing each letter from memory. I took it upstairs, sat by the window, and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single page, lined paper, torn from a notebook. The ink was smudged in places, as if the writer had gripped the pen too tightly. "Dear Rachel, I saw your video. The one where you stood up and said no. I'm 17. I'm adopted. I never knew I could say no either. I always thought being grateful meant being silent. But you showed me something else. You showed me I can exist on my own terms, that I don't have to bleed to be worth something, that I can just be. Thank you. You gave me a name to hold on to, not yours, mine, and I'll find it now, because of you, no signature. Just a tiny heart at the bottom corner. I read it 3 times before I cried. Not for Coraline, not for Merrick, not for Grace, for her. For the girl who saw her own reflection in my defiance. For the 17-year-old who still had time to choose, to fight, to love herself without asking permission. I wiped my cheeks and folded the letter carefully, placing it next to my name change certificate in the box. This was the legacy I never expected, but the one I wanted. Not revenge, not headlines, not even justice. Just proof that my voice echoed farther than their silence ever could. I set the camera on the windowsill, angled just right to catch the evening light spilling across my face. No makeup, no filter, just me. Rachel Hale. The name still felt new on my tongue, like fresh air after too many years underground. I took a deep breath, then hit record. My name is Rachel, I began, and if you're watching this, you've probably heard my story, or a version of it. Maybe you read headlines, maybe you watched a live stream. I paused, letting the silence breathe before I filled it again. But this isn't about the drama. It's not about a hospital, or forged documents, or stolen names. It's about something much bigger. It's about what happens when silence is demanded, and what happens when we finally say no. I looked straight into the lens. You are not born to repay a debt. You are not created to serve someone else's need. You are not a placeholder. You are not a tool. You are not disposable. I swallowed, steadying my voice. You were born to exist, fully, loudly, freely. You were born for your own story, not the one someone else wrote for you. The message I'd received from the 17-year-old girl echoed in my mind. If you've ever been told that being grateful means staying quiet, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't. You can be thankful for life and still claim it as your own. You can love people and still leave them if they hurt you. You can say no, you can walk away, and you do not need to apologize for it. I shifted slightly, leaning forward. I used to think silence was survival, that if I kept my head down, kept smiling, I could earn love. But love that demands your silence isn't love, it's leverage. And silence that's forced isn't safety, it's a cage. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't look away. So here's my truth. I was never really asked if I wanted to be a daughter. I was assigned the role, but today I choose to be a woman, a survivor, a speaker. A soft exhale left my lungs. This is the last video I'll make about this, not because I'm finished, but because I'm finally beginning. My silence used to be my sentence, now it's my choice. I looked into the lens one last time. And if you're listening, if you're someone who's been made to feel small, invisible, owed, you're not alone. I see you, I believe you, and I want you to know something powerful. You can be loud, you can take up space, you can exist on your terms. I reached forward and tapped end. The video uploaded in minutes. I didn't watch it back, I didn't need to. I knew what it was. Not a confession, not a cry for help, but a declaration. By nightfall it had been shared over 10,000 times, not because it was scandalous, not because it was viral bait, but because it said what so many were still afraid to say: you don't owe your life to the ones who gave it to you. In the quiet afterward, I lit a candle, brewed tea, and opened my window to the city's night breeze. Somewhere out there, someone else was writing their letter, or packing their bags, or whispering no for the first time, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.